Pay attention, because what follows either restructures how you have been moving through the world, or it confirms what a part of you already sensed, but was never given the language to act on. There is a version of you that has walked into rooms and handed people exactly what they needed to underestimate you, exploit you, or position themselves above you, not through malice, not through carelessness, but through something far more dangerous than either of those things. Through honesty, through openness, through the deeply human and completely understandable impulse to be known, to be understood, to let people in because you were raised to believe that transparency was a virtue and that the right people would honor it. And some of them did, but the wrong ones, the ones who were calculating while you were being authentic, the ones who were mapping the terrain while you were handing them the coordinates, those people took what you gave them freely and used it with a precision you never saw coming until the damage was done. Machiavelli did not write The Prince as a guide for evil men. He wrote it as a field manual for realists, for people who were willing to look at the world as it actually operates rather than as they wished it would. And one of the most consistently misunderstood pillars of his entire philosophy was not about force, not about cruelty, not about the amoral pursuit of power at any cost. It was about this. What you reveal about yourself is not merely personal expression. It is a transfer of leverage. Every piece of information you give to another person, your fears, your plans, your financial position, your private history, your desperation, is a tool. And the question that Machiavelli asked, and that behavioral science has since confirmed in study after study, is a simple one. Who is holding that tool? And what are they capable of doing with it? This video is about 5 specific things, 5 categories of personal information that the psychologically sophisticated person has learned to protect with the same discipline and the same seriousness that they protect their finances, their health, and their reputation. Not because life is a war, not because everyone is an enemy, but because not everyone who smiles at you is your ally, and the man who understands the difference and lives accordingly moves through the world with a quality of personal power that the endlessly open, endlessly transparent, endlessly available man will never access, no matter how genuinely good his intentions are. Now, before this goes any deeper, if this content speaks to something you have been searching for, hit that like button right now and subscribe to this channel, and make sure you turn on the notification bell so you never miss what comes next. Because this channel exists for people who are ready to understand how the world actually works. And while you are down there in the comments, do something that would genuinely mean a lot to this community. Drop your location and the exact time you are watching this, whether it is a Tuesday morning in Manchester, a late Saturday night in Calgary, a quiet afternoon in Melbourne, or a Sunday in Atlanta when you are finally sitting down to learn something for yourself. Write it in the comments. Every time someone does that, it is a reminder that this conversation is happening all over the world, at every hour, with people who have decided that understanding themselves and the dynamics around them is worth their time. That matters. That is the community being built here. Now let us get into the 5 laws. There is a distinction that most people have never been taught, and the absence of it has cost them more in their professional lives, their personal relationships, and their social positioning than almost any other single gap in their understanding of how human dynamics actually work. The distinction is this. There is a difference between having weaknesses, which every human being on earth possesses without exception, and revealing those weaknesses to people who have not earned the right to know them, and who exist in environments where that information can be used against you. The first is humanity. The second is exposure. And Machiavelli understood, with the clinical precision of a man who had spent his entire career observing how power is built and how it is dismantled, that the exposed man is not the honest man. He is the vulnerable man, and vulnerability in a competitive environment is not a virtue. It is an invitation. Most people move through their lives operating under a belief that was instilled early and reinforced constantly. The belief that showing vulnerability builds connection, that admitting weakness earns respect, that letting people see where you hurt demonstrates a quality of emotional courage that draws good people toward you. And in the right context, with the right person, at the right moment in a relationship that has already established genuine trust, that belief is correct. The problem is that most people apply it universally, which means they apply it indiscriminately, which means they reveal the geography of their fears and insecurities to people who are still, in every practical sense, strangers, colleagues who compete with them, acquaintances who have not demonstrated loyalty, social environments where the information will circulate far beyond the person they told it to. And the moment that information circulates, it stops being a personal admission. It becomes a shared resource. It becomes the thing that people reference when they need to understand how to handle you. Research in organizational psychology confirms what Machiavelli declared in the 16th century, that individuals in competitive professional environments who openly display emotional vulnerabilities are consistently perceived as less capable, are passed over for opportunities at higher rates, and are more frequently targeted by manipulative colleagues who use that disclosed vulnerability as a lever. The Psychology Today research literature on manipulation is explicit on this point. Manipulators identify and exploit weaknesses as their primary mechanism of control. Not invented weaknesses, real ones. The ones the target handed them. The ones the target shared because they thought they were among people who would honor that sharing. The first law is not about becoming a closed, impenetrable wall that lets no one close. It is about developing the discipline of calibrated disclosure, the understanding that your weaknesses, your fears, your insecurities, the places where you are still healing or still figuring things out, belong to the small and carefully chosen group of people who have demonstrated over time and through action, not words alone, that they hold what you give them with care. Everyone else gets the composed exterior, the professional bearing, the face that says everything is measured and considered, not because you are hiding yourself from the world, because you are protecting the parts of yourself that matter from the people who have not earned access to them. Consider what actually happens in a professional environment. And this is something that most people watching this have experienced personally, even if they never framed it in these terms. When someone discloses a weakness to a colleague, perhaps it is a fear of public speaking, perhaps it is uncertainty about a new role, perhaps it is the admission that a particular area of work sits outside their current confidence. In the moment, that disclosure often feels like it builds connection, and sometimes it does, briefly, because the colleague responds with warmth and reassurance. But that same colleague, 3 months later, when a decision is being made about who leads the next major presentation, or who takes the stretch assignment, or who the manager consults when assessing team capability, that colleague has filed the disclosure. They may not even be consciously referencing it, but it is there, woven into the data they are using to calculate where you fit relative to themselves, what they can rely on you for, and where the ceiling of your trajectory appears to be from where they are standing. That is not malice, that is human cognition. And Machiavelli's genius was in recognizing that human cognition, left to its own devices, will always use available information in the service of the person whose cognition it is. There is also a social dimension to this law that reaches beyond professional environments and into the daily texture of relationships, gatherings, and casual conversation. The person who shares their fears in a social setting, who admits to being anxious about money, about their health, about the state of a relationship, about whether the choices they made in their 40s were the right ones, is not being honest in any protected sense. They are distributing information into a social network that will carry it further than they intended, in forms they cannot predict, to people they did not address. This is not paranoia. This is how social information actually travels. What begins as a private admission between two people at dinner becomes the context through which both of those people discuss you in your absence, becomes the thing a third person knows about you without you ever choosing to tell them, becomes the filter through which your decisions and your energy are interpreted by people who now believe they understand something essential about you that you never consciously gave them. Protecting your weaknesses is not the same as denying them. It is the decision about who earns the right to know them. When you stop handing your vulnerabilities to rooms that are not safe for them, something shifts almost immediately in how those rooms treat you. The shift is not dramatic. It is quiet, but it is permanent, and it runs entirely in your favor. If this first law landed, If you can already think of a moment where revealing a weakness cost you something you did not expect to lose, drop in the comments, "I protect what matters." Because that is where real power begins. There is something that happens in conversations, in meetings, in social gatherings, over dinner, in the relaxed and unguarded space of what feels like friendly exchange, where people announce their plans. They share what they are working on. They describe where they are headed and what they intend to build. They lay out the vision because the vision excites them and they want to express that excitement, or because they want feedback, or because something in the social dynamic of the moment made sharing feel like the natural, generous thing to do. And in almost every case, they have made a strategic error that they will not recognize as an error until weeks or months later, when the plan they shared openly has been quietly complicated by someone who was listening more carefully than they appeared to be. The common definition of sharing plans is this: I tell people what I am working on because collaboration, accountability, and support require communication. The inversion of that definition is this: the announcement of a plan before it is complete transfers the decision-making power over that plan to every person who heard it, because every person who heard it now has the ability to interfere with it, compete with it, discourage it, preemptively position themselves around it, or begin shaping their own behavior in response to the information, none of which was invited, and all of which operates outside of your control. The true strategic definition of what it means to protect your next move is this: a plan announced is a plan exposed, and a plan exposed is a plan that now has to survive not the obstacles of reality alone, but the additional weight of every competing interest that was handed a copy of it before it was ready to withstand scrutiny. Marcus Aurelius, who governed an empire and understood the mechanics of strategic restraint better than almost any leader in recorded history, operated on a principle that the Stoics built into the foundation of their entire philosophy: that what belongs to you is your intention and your action, and that everything which exists outside those two things is subject to forces you cannot control. When you announce your next move before it is made, you have taken something that was entirely yours, the power of the unread hand, and placed it into a space where it is no longer entirely yours. You have given it to the room. And rooms, as Machiavelli observed with devastating accuracy, contain people whose interests are not aligned with your success, not because they are evil, because they are human. And humans, when given information about someone else's trajectory, instinctively calculate what that trajectory means for their own. The mastery here is learning to move in silence until the movement is complete, and then to let the results speak in the place where the announcement would have been. There is a man who tells everyone what he is going to do. There is a man who does it, and then tells everyone what he has done. Those two men exist in the same world, operate in the same environments, possess comparable intelligence and capability, and they are treated with radically different levels of respect by every person who knows them. The first man is assessed on his intentions. The second man is assessed on his results. And results cannot be interfered with because by the time they are visible, the plan that produced them is already complete. The ship has already left the harbor. The only thing left to observe is that it arrived. There is something specific and consistent that happens when people announce unfinished plans, something that goes beyond the risk of interference from competitors or rivals. The announcement itself, the moment of declaring what is coming, provides a psychological satisfaction that is neurologically very close to the satisfaction of actually completing the thing. Research in motivational psychology has documented this phenomenon with striking clarity. When people share their goals and intentions and receive social acknowledgement for them, the brain registers a version of the reward that completing the goal would have produced, which means that the announcement, in a very real neurological sense, partially substitutes for the execution. The man who told everyone about the business he was going to build, the career move he was planning to make, the project he was about to launch. That man is statistically less likely to follow through with the urgency and discipline the execution requires, because part of his brain has already been satisfied by the telling. The man who said nothing, who kept the plan internal and allowed it to generate pressure rather than release it through social disclosure, is the man who finishes. He finishes because the internal pressure was never discharged. It accumulated, and it powered him through the difficulty. This is the mastery of concealing the next move. Not secrecy for its own sake, but the strategic discipline of allowing your execution to precede your announcement, and your outcomes to do the work that your words would have done less reliably, and at much greater risk. The vision stays inside until the work is done. And when it emerges as a fact, not a promise. Comment below, I see the board clearly now. Because the man who moves without broadcasting his direction is the man no one can position against in advance. Here is something that a significant number of people in this audience have experienced in one form or another, and that most of them never identified for what it was. The moment when information about their financial position, how much they were earning, how much they were struggling, how much they had saved or how little, the state of a business, the weight of a debt, entered a conversation or a relationship where it did not belong. And in the days, weeks, or months that followed, the dynamic of that relationship shifted in a direction they did not choose and could not fully explain. Suddenly, the person they told was more comfortable asking for things. Suddenly, the negotiation at work took a different shape than it should have. Suddenly, the people around them began treating their financial situation as a shared resource, a piece of context for decisions that were supposed to be theirs alone. Suddenly, they felt the quiet but unmistakable weight of being known in a way that changed how they were treated, and not in the direction they had hoped. The psychological mechanism behind this is the same one that operates in every high-information asymmetry dynamic. The person with more information about the other person's financial reality holds a structural advantage in every interaction that follows, whether they consciously deploy it or not. In negotiation theory, this principle is so well established that it has become foundational. Research consistently demonstrates that the party who reveals their financial constraints, their urgency to close, or their alternatives, or lack of them, is reliably the party that receives the worse outcome. Not because the other party is malicious, because the information changes the calculation. It changes what is offered. It changes what is pushed for. It changes what is accepted as reasonable. And it does all of this automatically, often without either party consciously recognizing that the shift has occurred. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince that the prince must seem virtuous and powerful without revealing too much about his true resources or intentions, because to reveal resources is to invite demands that match them. A wealthy man who advertises his wealth does not receive admiration alone. He receives pressure, expectation, requests, elevated costs, and the particular category of attention from opportunistic people that he would not have received if he had remained discreet. A struggling man who advertises his struggle does not receive empathy alone. He receives reduced offers, reduced leverage, reduced respect, and the subtle but consistent treatment of someone who is perceived to have fewer options, even when the options available to him are sufficient. In both directions, the public disclosure of financial position changes the nature of every interaction that surrounds it, and the change almost never advantages the person who disclosed. This is not about shame. It is not about pretending to be something you are not. The man who protects his financial information from the general social environment is not deceiving anyone. He is maintaining the privacy that is his absolute right, and he is preserving the conditions under which his negotiations, his relationships, and his opportunities remain clean and uncontaminated by data that other people will use, consciously or not, to calibrate how far they can push him, how little they can offer him, and how much of what is his they can reasonably expect to access. Your financial situation belongs to you, your accountant, and the people you are in genuine life partnership with. It does not belong to your colleagues, your extended acquaintances, your social network, or the casual environment of your daily conversations. There is a reason that the most financially sophisticated people in every profession, the ones who have built and sustained real wealth across decades, are almost universally discreet about the specifics of their position. It is not modesty, and it is not false humility. It is the lived recognition of something that Machiavelli encoded in The Prince, and that the research literature on impression management has since confirmed empirically. The moment other people know your financial reality in detail, They begin treating you according to what that reality implies about your options, your needs, and your capacity to say no. And the treatment they extend is calibrated not to your benefit, but to theirs. The person who knows you are struggling will negotiate more aggressively. The person who knows you are comfortable will ask for more. The person who knows you are wealthy will extend requests and expectations that would never have materialized if your position had remained private. In every case, the information was used by the person who held it in the service of their own interests. That is not a moral failure on their part. It is the reliable operation of human self-interest that Machiavelli documented with unflinching accuracy 5 centuries ago. The man who understands and holds that boundary does not protect his privacy alone. He protects his leverage. And leverage, as Machiavelli understood better than anyone, is the foundation on which every favorable outcome in every competitive environment is built. Drop in the comments, "My peace is not for sale." Because financial privacy is not secrecy, it is sovereignty. You have done this. You have been in a conversation with a colleague, with someone you were only beginning to know, with a person whose approval felt significant in that moment, and you shared something from your past, a failure, a difficult period, a relationship that ended badly, a professional mistake that cost you something, a chapter of your life that was hard and that you worked through, and that, in the telling of it, felt like it demonstrated your depth, your resilience, your humanity. And you told it because the conversation had reached that register, that particular warmth and openness, and it felt like the right thing to share. It felt like connection. And perhaps in that moment, it was. But somewhere in the days or weeks or months that followed, that information found its way into a context you never intended for it, used in a way you never authorized, by a person who had filed it away not as a piece of your story that earned their respect, but as a data point in their ongoing assessment of where your pressure points are and how to find them when needed. The reframe is not that your history is shameful, or that sharing it was foolish, or that you should be harder and less human than you are. The reframe is precision about audience. Your personal history, particularly the chapters that contain struggle, failure, pain, or vulnerability, belongs to people who have demonstrated over time and through concrete action that they hold your story as sacred, not as leverage. That distinction is critical, because the same story told to the right person deepens trust and builds genuine intimacy, and told to the wrong person becomes ammunition that can be deployed the moment the relationship or the environment turns competitive. And relationships turn competitive more often and more suddenly than most people expect, because Machiavelli's observation about human nature, that men are driven primarily by self-interest, and that even those who mean well will use available information in service of their own position when the stakes are high enough, is not cynicism. It is documented human behavior, confirmed across decades of social psychology research on manipulation, exploitation, and interpersonal competition. Sun Tzu wrote that the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. And the modern translation of that principle into interpersonal dynamics is this: the person who knows your history of defeats has already identified the terrain where you are most likely to retreat. They do not need to confront you directly. They do not need to make open moves against you. They need only apply pressure at the point your history revealed, and your own nervous system will do the rest, because pain that happened once has a way of making you flinch at the memory of it, even when the current situation is entirely different. This is not weakness. This is neuroscience. And the strategically informed person understands it well enough to protect the information that makes them susceptible to it. The elevated behavioral directive here is one of the most important in all 5 laws. Audit your disclosure habits. Sit with the question of who actually knows your most vulnerable chapters, and ask honestly whether those people have earned that knowledge through demonstrated loyalty, or whether you handed it to them because the conversation reached a certain temperature and it felt natural to share. If the answer is the latter, the information cannot be retrieved, but the habit can be revised. The man who begins applying this law moves through every new relationship and every existing one with a clearer understanding of what belongs in the inner circle and what belongs in the professional or social register, and that clarity alone changes the quality of every interaction he has. because the people who might have used his history against him no longer have it. And the people who are always worthy of it, they already had it. And they are holding it exactly as he always hoped they would. Comment below. My evolution is non-negotiable because the man who controls the story of his own life never gives someone else the pen. This is the one that reaches the furthest into the mechanics of how outcomes are determined in every high-stakes situation a person will ever encounter. The negotiation, the relationship, the business deal, the social positioning, the career decision, and it is the one that people most consistently violate, not out of ignorance, but out of something that feels in the moment like honesty, and that is, in practice, a transfer of all their leverage to the person or the situation they are trying to navigate. The thing they reveal is desperation. The depth of how much they need a particular outcome. How badly they want the job, or the relationship, or the deal, or the approval, or the result. And the moment that desperation becomes visible, in the language they use, in the speed of their responses, in the concessions they make before they are asked, in the way their energy changes when the possibility of the outcome feels close, the entire dynamic of the situation reorganizes itself around the person who has already broadcast the most important piece of information anyone in a negotiation can possess, that the other party needs this more than you do, and the entire negotiation has already been decided before a single term is discussed. The weak pole of this dynamic is the person whose need is transparent, whose urgency is readable, who has effectively handed the other party a remote control to their emotional state and is now watching that other party use it, consciously or not, to extract more, offer less, and delay more confidently, because delay costs nothing to the person who wants the outcome less. Research in negotiation science, confirmed across multiple published studies in the Journal of Applied Psychology and the behavioral economics literature of the last 3 decades, establishes this as one of the most reliable dynamics in all of human interaction. The perceived intensity of one's desire for an outcome is directly inverse to the leverage one holds in securing it on favorable terms. The more visibly you need something, the less the person who controls access to it needs to offer you, and the more they can take back from whatever was already on the table. The strong pole. And this is the architecture Machiavelli described when he wrote about the prince who governs through the strategic management of what is known about him, is the person whose level of investment in any particular outcome is genuinely unclear to the people who hold that outcome, not because they do not care. They may care enormously. They may have spent months working toward this exact moment, but they have developed the discipline to hold that care internally, to let it fuel their preparation without letting it contaminate their presentation, to move through the interaction with a quality of composed interest, engaged but not desperate, focused but not frantic, capable of walking away and willing, in principle, to do so. That last element, the genuine willingness to walk away, is the foundation of all personal power in any high-stakes dynamic. It is not a bluff. A bluff can be called. It is a reality that was constructed in advance by making sure that alternatives exist, that the current option, however desirable, is not the only option, and that the option of walking away was evaluated soberly and found to be livable. The bridge between the two poles is the cultivation of what the Stoics called detachment. Not indifference, because indifference produces poor work and shallow engagement, but the separation between what you want and what your face shows, between how deeply you care about the outcome and how the other party is allowed to read that caring. This is a learnable discipline. It is not a personality trait that some people have and others are born without. It is a practice. It is the decision made before every significant interaction to keep the intensity of your desire private and to present instead the composed bearing of a person who has already assessed the situation, who has already identified alternatives, and who is genuinely open to the outcome of the engagement, but not destroyed by the possibility that it does not resolve in their favor. The practical construction of this posture begins before the interaction itself, before the negotiation, before the conversation where the ask is going to be made, before the meeting where the outcome matters. The person who is applying this law sits with the question of what they will do if the answer is no, not as a pessimistic exercise, as a structural one. They identify their next best option with enough specificity and enough genuine viability that the alternative is real, not hypothetical. And they allow the reality of that alternative to settle into their posture and their energy before they walk into the room. That settling is not performance. It is the natural behavioral output of a person who actually has somewhere else to go, and the people on the other side of that interaction will register it, though they will not be able to name what they are registering. They will describe it as confidence, as maturity, as the particular bearing of a person who is serious but not desperate. And they will make better offers to that person than they would make to someone whose need is visible in every word they choose and every microsecond of silence they rush to fill. When that bearing becomes natural, when it stops being something you build consciously before each interaction and starts being something you embody as a default, the nature of every negotiation, every relationship, and every opportunity you pursue changes permanently. Because the person who does not need you, but chooses you anyway, is always the most valuable person in any dynamic. And you become that person the moment you stop revealing how much you need the thing on the other side of the table. If this final law shifted something in the way you are going to walk into the next significant interaction of your life, drop in the comments, "I am sovereign." Because sovereignty over what you reveal about your own need is the last wall between you and the person who can outmaneuver you. Every single law in this framework: protect your weaknesses, conceal your next move, guard your financial position, audit who holds your personal history, and never reveal the depth of what you need, is not 5 separate pieces of advice. It is one principle expressed across 5 dimensions of human life. The principle is this: information about you is leverage, and where that leverage lives determines who holds the power in every room you enter, every deal you negotiate, every relationship you navigate, and every opportunity you pursue. The man who has internalized all 5 laws does not walk through the world paranoid or closed or cold. He walks through it with a quality of self-possession that most people spend their entire lives trying to find and never locate, because they have been looking for it in the wrong place. In external validation, in titles, in financial success, in the approval of people who, if they are honest, they have been trying to impress their whole lives. Self-possession is not found out there. It is built in here. In the decision about what you reveal and what you protect, made deliberately every single day, in every significant interaction you have. What makes this framework different from the usual advice about protecting yourself, the surface-level recommendations about privacy settings and professional discretion and being careful about who you trust, is that it operates at the level of psychological mechanics rather than behavioral rules. Rules get broken under pressure, because pressure produces the impulse to reach for comfort, and disclosure is one of the most reliable sources of short-term comfort that a human being has access to. When you are uncertain, telling someone resolves the uncertainty of carrying it alone. When you are struggling, disclosing it produces the temporary relief of shared weight. When you are excited about a plan, announcing it produces the social warmth of shared anticipation. Every one of these impulses is natural, fully human, and in the right environment entirely appropriate. The 5 laws do not ask you to extinguish these impulses. They ask you to develop the discipline to direct them toward the right people, in the right environments, at the right moments, rather than releasing them indiscriminately into whatever social environment happens to be available when the pressure builds. That direction is the difference between a man who gives his power away gradually, over years, without ever recognizing the transaction, and a man who holds it, compounds it, and moves through the world from a position of genuine and durable psychological authority. Machiavelli was born into a world of Florentine politics, where the distance between power and its loss was often a single miscalculated disclosure, a plan revealed too early, a weakness admitted to the wrong person, a financial position made public that invited predators who had been waiting for exactly that opening. He studied this not as philosophy, but as survival, and what he produced was not a guide for evil men, but a map for clear-eyed ones. The 5 laws in this content are not the full map. They are the territory that matters most for the man who is navigating the social and professional terrain of the 21st century, with the awareness that the same dynamics Machiavelli documented in 1513 are operating in every office, every relationship, every negotiation, and every social environment he will encounter for the rest of his life. Human nature has not changed. The arenas have. The principles remain. There is a version of you that moves through rooms and never hands anyone the coordinates to his pressure points. A version that builds and executes without announcing, that guards what is private without apologizing for its privacy, that presents composed certainty to environments that would exploit exposed uncertainty, that holds the depth of his own desire for outcomes so close that no one on the other side of any table can read it and recalibrate against it. That version is not a fantasy. He is not a different person. He is the same person, operating with 5 specific disciplines applied consistently until they are no longer disciplines at all, until they are the way he moves, the way he breathes in a room, the way he carries himself through every interaction without announcing what it cost him to get here. The distance between the man reading this now and that version of himself is not talent, not circumstance, not opportunity. It is the decision to apply what was in these 5 laws before the next significant moment arrives. That moment, for almost everyone watching this, is closer than they think. Most people who have watched this will close it, carry a general sense that something true was said, and return to the patterns that brought them here. A few will write one of the laws down, apply it once, and let it fade when the discomfort of the new behavior passes. In a rare few, the ones this was always meant for, the ones who felt every law land with the particular weight of recognition that comes when something true meets something already known but not yet named. Those people will take all 5, apply them in sequence, and discover within weeks that the quality of their interactions, their negotiations, their relationships, and their sense of personal authority has shifted in a direction that no self-help principle about positivity or mindset could have produced. Because these are not mindset tools, they are behavioral mechanics, and mechanics applied consistently produce results that feel nothing short of transformational. You already know which one you are. The only question is what you do next. And the answer to that question begins right now, before you close this, and before the clarity of this moment fades into the noise of everything else competing for your attention. That is the community this channel is building. People who are done being managed by dynamics they could not see, and who are willing to do the work of understanding those dynamics precisely enough to architect something different. Like this video if it reached you. Subscribe to this channel if you want to go deeper, because what is being built here goes further and darker and more useful than what you watched today. And leave a comment. Go beyond the affirmation, though those matter. Name the law that hit you hardest, the one that made you sit back for a second because you could already feel where it applied in your own life. That comment might be the most honest thing you write all week, and this community is built for exactly that caliber of honesty.